There are a few things I want to cover in this one, and I'm actually finding a situation that when I upload videos about a particular topic, such as the way that the news is so dominated by coronavirus, when I upload a video, there's a new development with that specific, with that particular story. There's something else that I can add to it. So I'm always finding that I've uploaded a video and then thinking, well, there's a development to that story. Um, so that's just kind of a disclaimer. And the latest news is that Trump has ordered his administration to withdraw American funding from the World Health Organization. That may be for another video at another time. That's the latest development. Um, I'm I'm cautiously in favor of that, insofar as I understand where the criticism is coming from against the World Health Organization. Um, but if it's a way to target the Chinese government, I'm not sure if it's the best way, because all that will happen is the Chinese will come in and dominate the WHO even more. So I'm not sure if withdrawing funding is the best tool that the Trump administration can use against China. I think there may be other methods, but I don't know yet. I need to think about that one. Because these are complex issues and there's different angles to look at with it. I mean, as a strategy. Um, I want to talk about pandemic's name, because this itself has become a major debate point. Um, so Trump called it the Chinese virus or the China virus, and that's attracting heavy criticism from home and abroad, namely with the accusation that it's racially charged and that it's fueling racist attacks against Chinese nationals and East Asians. Um, and it isn't this isn't just domestic criticism, like I say, this is coming from lots of quarters. Amnesty International, well-respected human rights organization that hasn't shied away from criticizing China and its human rights abuses, had a post today which I have to say I found rather pathetic and really not fitting their standards. They had a post saying, just a reminder, calling it Chinese virus is racist. That to me is much more apt for a woke student trying to virtue signal, trying to look for some little cause celebre to make an issue out of, rather than a well respected and well established human rights organization that need to be prioritizing other things, namely what's going on in China regarding their threats against domestic research, what's going on in China regarding the appalling situation for people who are being silenced, citizens of Wuhan who are tearfully making videos saying that they know it's risky to do so, but they want people to know the truth. There's a lot of things going on in China that AI can be talking about. And to be fair, they have. I wouldn't say Amnesty International is stooges of Beijing, at least not yet, because they have consistently been outspoken against China. Amnesty International, as a big organization, is going to get its critics. I've defended it before, and I will do so. But I think that post was wrong. If the post was about, for example, saying racist attacks or racist abuse of Chinese people is wrong, I totally agree with that. But what they're getting into is the semantics. And this is very important because I think that it's being used by the Chinese government as a way to sort of deflect criticism from its approach to this. Now, some say that Trump's attacks on the World Health Organization are to distract people from his handling of the crisis. Let's be clear, Trump's handling of this has been very inconsistent. His statements have been appalling. And only a few weeks ago, this needs to be recognized, Trump was praising China. He was praising Xi Jinping. He was praising Chinese transparency. So for him to now be criticizing that seems a bit inconsistent, but that's kind of the nature of this president. It's not like the Chinese suddenly changed their behavior. You know, they were lacking transparency from the start. Um, But let's look a bit at this term China virus and Chinese virus. I personally don't use it, so you'll notice on my video I use coronavirus COVID-19, which is the formal scientific name for this strain. Um, but do I think that China virus or Chinese virus is racist in of itself? No, I don't see how it can be, because it is a simple fact that the outbreak began in China. Um, Almost certainly in that wet market in Wuhan. That's not 100% sure, but pretty much the scientific consensus both in China and abroad is that's where it began. So, as a point or as a matter of fact, that is the case, right? In that sense, it differs from the Spanish flu, which is um, inaccurate. It is a misnomer because the reason the Spanish flu or the 1918 influenza pandemic became known as Spanish flu was because during World War One, Spain was neutral, and therefore its press weren't subject to wartime censorship. Wasn't subject to wartime censorship. Therefore, the Spanish press could report on this new pandemic more freely. That gave the perception that there were more cases in Spain. There is a strongly held theory today that it probably began in a US Army base in Kansas, but we'll probably never be 100% sure. But it's fairly certain that it didn't begin in Spain. Nevertheless, to this day, it's known as the Spanish flu. Now, I'm not aware of any contemporary incidents of Spanish nationals getting any sort of jingoistic abuse with that. Maybe there was, but I'm not familiar with it. Um, Certainly, there have been racial incidents over this virus in Europe and in North America. But I honestly think that racists don't need a lot of motivation to do what they do. Racists have access to the internet. They know it began in China, and I don't think they need to hear the American president use that term in order to think, oh, well, Trump says it, so, I'll go out and attack the next Chinese person I say. I see. Does that mean I think that Trump should be casually saying Chinese virus? Not necessarily. Um, I wouldn't personally use that term, not because it's not accurate. It is accurate, but it's informal. And if the idea is to have a swipe at the Chinese government, maybe it's better to say the CCP virus. Now that would infuriate the Chinese government. But if the idea is to have a swipe at the Chinese government, that may be a better strategy to do so. Um, but I would say those who are obsessing over the terminology being racist seem to care more about that, semantics of it, rather than what the Chinese regime has actually been doing from the start. The fact they covered it up in those first critical weeks, the fact they punished the doctors who diagnosed it, the fact they expelled foreign journalists, the fact they have crushed domestic dissent, the fact they have not been transparent, the fact they tried to bully Taiwan at the World Health Organization, the fact they used the World Health Organization to parrot their propaganda, the fact they've pushed jingoistic conspiracy theories. I mean, the list just goes on and on. And I am very concerned that we're going to get into a situation where people buy into Chinese propaganda. I've already seen apologists come out and say, oh, well, they've. I actually saw one guy today, and I must admit I lost my temper. British guy say no government's handled this better than the Chinese government. And I must admit I got quite angry with that because it was just so astonishingly naive. So it goes without saying that in China, the entire media apparatus is controlled by the state, so they can put out their positive propaganda. Um, I think that there really needs to be a reckoning after this in terms of our relationships to China. I read today the Daily Telegraph has cancelled ads and opinion pieces that are paid for by the Chinese state. I didn't even know they had such a thing. I don't buy the Telegraph that much. It's good they've done that, but I'd like to see other papers follow suit if they have any paid for ads or articles by the Chinese state. We really, really need to be sending out a message. Now, the idea of this terminology being problematic. The thing is, there is a history of outbreaks and diseases actually having the location at core in the vernacular of how it's discussed. So, for example, German measles, West Nile virus, Ebola, I understand is named after a river, the 1972 London flu, which wasn't a major global pandemic, but it was so named in the United States because it was thought to have originated in London. So there's many examples. So why are those things not considered racist? Why do we not consider Spanish flu, which is actually inaccurate, unlike China virus, it's inaccurate, but we don't consider that bigoted towards Spanish people. Perhaps people in Spain don't like it, I don't know, but I think if you're getting hung up on the terminology more than what has been going on with the Chinese state, you're not getting your priorities right. That doesn't mean that I think Trump should go around saying Chinese virus. I can see it being problematic, and I can see it being uncomfortable for Chinese people who may have been subjected to racial abuse. But I don't think it's the biggest issue out there. And the World Health Organization has been too cozy with China. Tedros Adhanom has personally been too cozy with China. So Trump is a deeply polarizing figure. There's many things I dislike about this president, but taking a tough line on China is not one of them. And I fear that too many people in the West, too many on the left, are so hung up on their opposition to Trump that they see China as a secondary issue. Maybe they don't approve of what the Chinese government's doing, but I don't think they fully understand the extent of a threat that China poses to democratic countries, because this is going to go well beyond this pandemic. It gets into an issue of control, it gets into an issue of influence, and we've seen the consequences of Chinese dishonesty with the World Health Organization. We're all paying for it. So, summed up, I personally wouldn't use the term Chinese virus because I think that can perhaps stigmatize Chinese nationals. But in terms of accuracy, it's not inaccurate, and the Chinese people need to accept that. They need to accept it did indeed begin in China, and this is also the second time it's happened after SARS. So it's not like this is, oh well, it can happen anywhere. This is the second time it's happened in China. It could happen again in 10 years. They clearly learned nothing after SARS. So what people should not be doing is just assuming that the Chinese government's just another government. It's not. Um, I mean, there were reports that they were actually pressuring German diplomatic staff to talk about the Chinese government in a positive light. This is how China behaves. It thinks it can bully its way around the world, pressure governments to speak about them in glowing terms. So China demands respect, but it does very little to show respect. And it must also be understood when people talk about China, they're not talking about the Chinese people. It's well understood in language when you say the name of a country, you're not talking about the culture so much. The general understanding is if I say China or Russia or France, that means the government in the context of these sort of subjects. I mean, I could say Beijing's position is this, Moscow's position is that, and so on. So it's very important that people understand why language is used the way it's used. And there are people out there who believe that Trump is saying Chinese virus in order to. I heard the guy I mentioned actually said to scapegoat the Chinese. Well, if he's talking about the Chinese government, they should be scapegoated. No, correction, they're not scapegoated. They're correctly held liable for what they have done. It's the Chinese government that's trying to scapegoat outsiders by expelling foreign journalists, by pushing jingoistic and sometimes outright racist posts online. Apparently, there has actually been a lot of racial abuse of black people in China. There's not many of them. But in Guangdong province, there are black laborers, mostly from Nigeria. and apparently they have been subjected to some racial abuse. Um, so China really has no right to be pointing fingers at any country. And as for Donald Trump, he deserves a lot of domestic criticism. Absolutely. He's inconsistent. Some of his statements have been outright lies. I don't think he's wrong to take a hard line against China. And if the World Health Organization is going to protect the Chinese regime, then maybe they do need a bit of backlash because then it's not fit for purpose. So there's nothing black and white about any of this, but people need to understand that calling the pandemic the China virus is an accurate statement and is not racist in of itself. But I also would concede that it's not the most diplomatic thing for Trump to say.